Welcome and thanks for joining the Fascism on Film podcast. I'm James Kent, and along with me is Teal Minton.
Hi, very excited to talk about some fascism today.
I don't know if you should be using the term.
Okay. Okay. I'm fascinated.
Okay. Fascinating. Yes, it's a fascinating world. So on our last episode, at the end, we mentioned what this next film was going to be. And today we're going to be talking about The Mortal Storm. It's a film from 1940. It's an American film from Warner Brothers, directed by Frank Borzage. Frank Borzage was an American filmmaker, and he was born I forget exactly where he was born, but he and his family moved to Utah when he was very early age.
Huh.
His parents were immigrants, and he was one of 14 children. 8 survived childhood. And he was an actor in the silent era, and then moved into film directing and was a very successful film director in silent films, and then also was the first director to win the Academy Award for Best Director. And I think that was in like 1927 or 28. And then in the 30s, he made a series of anti-war films, a couple that were sort of loosely involving the kind of concerns about the rise of Nazi Germany, a film called Little Man, What Now from 1933, and Three Comrades from 1938. He also did an anti-war film called No Greater Glory. Now, none of those 3 films Teal and I have seen, but as we've been doing some research, they do sound like ones that we are going to check out. But the film that perhaps in relation to fascism that he is well remembered for is this film with Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan and Frank Morgan, and even a very young Robert Young, called The Mortal Storm. And I'm going to let you, Teal, take over, kind of giving us a little quick synopsis of what this film is about.
Okay, so this is a story about the Roth family. Professor Victor Roth is the patriarch of this family. He's a very esteemed scientist and teaches at a university. He's got a daughter, Freya Roth, and a wife and 2 stepsons. And they're called the Roth family, but they are never, the word Judaism or Jewish is never mentioned in the entire film. There's a few little instances where they kind of say, well, they say on several occasions, you're non-Aryan, but they never say you're Jewish. They are the Roth family, and we see them slowly sort of disintegrate over the course of the film as some of them become Nazis, some of them become persecuted, and their friendships and their place in the community sort of disintegrates as fascism rises. Begins in 1933 and covers about the first 6 months of the Third Reich, really. It begins with Hitler being named chancellor. Not at the very beginning. There's a little bit of setup before that. We get to know the characters. We see sort of their normal, everyday pastoral life in this quaint little village in the mountains. Then Hitler is announced, is declared chancellor, and everything starts to break down.
I want to jump in for a second, Teal. So the screenplay, and again, it's the mission of the movie is to educate American audiences on the dangers of Nazi Germany. Because again, it started in 1939 is when the film went into production. Germany was getting very close to war, but had not yet pulled that lever. And people knew some of the things that were going on, but they didn't know everything that was happening. So they have to kind of take a lot of events and figure out plot convention to really kick things off. I think it's very clever. The film was adapted from a book, and it was nominated for adapted screenplay that year at the Oscars. The framing device with this Victor Roth and the family, they pack in a lot of information and plot on one single day, which is represented by Victor Roth's birthday. And we don't find this out until his birthday party later that day. And he's thrown this big kind of celebration at his college. So that's how
his students give him an award and celebrate him as this eminent man of science.
Yeah. So what you learn a lot is this guy is so respected, and everybody, adores him. He's very loved in the entire community. And then the sort of bomb drops.
Yeah, at his birthday party.
Yeah, that the radio comes on and announces that Hitler's been made chancellor. And it's the first time that you see the different attitudes of the people at this dinner table, where some people, and I think this is something that people here in America can now have experienced. There's an elation by some of this man coming to power that he is going to change things. And I don't think they exactly use these words, but basically the message that they're saying as they're listening to the radio is he's going to make Germany great again.
Oh, yeah, yeah. They use, there's several different phrases, but we're going to be stronger. We're going to squash our enemies. It's going to be great again. And there's this character Fritz who is initially sort of engaged to the professor's daughter, and he's sort of got this machismo. He really thinks like politics is not for women to think about, and he gets very excited in this scene. And you see the family start to fragment almost immediately in their difference of opinions. And their friend, this guy, Martin Breitner, who's played by Jimmy Stewart, he's a farmer. He's a veterinary student. He says, I'm a farmer. Politics isn't for me. I just keep cows. And Fritz says, if you want to keep your cows, you better have the right politics. And immediately they immediately have to leave the birthday party. The sons and Fritz, they have to leave and go down to the Nazi office or whatever for a special meeting. And they say to Martin, you come in with us, sooner or later, you're going to have to. So we see this fragmentation and to me, the first time I watched this film, this birthday party scene really hit me, because I've been through dinners like this with my own family, where things have broken down over politics and people get upset, and we see these real divisions start to fracture families.
I think you saw the film first.
I did, yeah.
And this was a few years. This is actually, it inadvertently kind of kicked us off this kind of going down this route of examining movies about fascism. And when I first watched it, I thought that, it did a great job at, again, sort of surface covering in a nice cutesy Hollywood way, the rise of Nazi Germany and the dangers of fascism. However, upon, rewatches, it's a really powerful movie, because in some recent events and seeing exposures, it seemed almost ridiculous at first to see how fast things could change. But I think what we're seeing is that when people have a will to do so, change can happen very dramatically, and it's very unsettling. And nobody did it as fast as Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, they did it really fast. And I think, the other thing that's great about this film, as you talk about its sort of emotional power, is that it's about there aren't speeches in this film. There's some lines here and there, but nobody comes out and gives a big speech about why fascism is bad. There's not really a heroic story in that sense. And as a result, what we have is people being torn apart and persecuted, and their lives sort of ruined and turned upside down. But there's a lot of like familial fracture between Freya and her brothers, between her and Fritz, between the father and the sons. And so these things really hit, I think, the audience emotionally, because it isn't just a political abstraction. It's actually these people's lives being destroyed.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a few, key moments that kind of start showing how things change. There's a beer hall scene where an old man refuses to sing the very jolly German anthems, and he's beat up for it.
Yeah, and that scene actually begins with Martin rejoining his friends for the first time in several months, and they're all Nazis.
Right, they've been kind of forcing him. They're like, why aren't you coming out with us? And Freya's the one who kind of convinces him to show up.
And Freya says, if you come, we won't talk about politics. And of course, the Nazis just want to talk about politics constantly. And Martin's saying, well, let's just hang out and have a little good time. And then everyone gets up to sing the song, and Martin doesn't get up. And then they start hassling Mr. Werner, this old man who's Martin's old teacher. And they start hassling. Martin stands up for him, gets the guy out of there safely, and then they beat him up in the street. And Martin and Freya go out to help him. And so we see that, so many people in this restaurant don't even have empathy for this old guy. They're not willing to step up. They're not willing to say anything. Basically, everyone's just on board singing the Nazi song in the beer hall.
And this is more powerful, I think, now than when I saw it 3 years ago.
Yeah.
In the opening, where Victor is so respected by his students, pretty quickly, there's another scene after Hitler's come to power where he's challenged by students who now will listen and take only their cues from what the Reich is telling them and the propagandist machine. And it comes into the idea of blood purity. And while they don't say anything about Jewish blood, the whole conversation is basically this argument that scientifically, blood is blood, and
the Nazis are saying, well, there's a difference between Aryan blood and non-Aryan blood, and that's part of our ideology. And if you're not teaching that, you're going against us, and therefore we need to shut you down.
Yeah.
And this is part of the, so in many ways, this film is like a primer on fascism. Like if you want to know what fascism is and how it behaves and what it does, you can watch this and it's almost like a checklist. In fact, I went through Umberto Eco's 14 points of fascism and marked off each one in the movie because it really covers everything from the gender politics to the family breakdown to the what we're talking about right now, which is sort of the war on thinking and anti-intellectualism. It's really important that the professor is not just like a shopkeeper, right, who's losing his business. He's there to show us the idea of intellectual freedom and scientific pursuit. And, he has this manuscript. After he is taken away and put in a concentration camp, he leaves this manuscript behind. And it becomes sort of a key thing that the Nazis don't want to let his manuscript out of the country because it somehow goes against their ideology. We don't get the specifics of it, but we assume it's something about blood, as is brought up in this class.
But, you see this where fascism attacks education.
Yeah.
And why? Because if you educate people on facts and science, they will probably be more resistant to authoritarianism and fascist ideology. And, again, I keep bringing in the present without getting into specifics of the conversation, but that's because we're seeing it in many different ways in any article that you can pick up and read or see the news. And so when you want to cling to your own country as a democracy, but you keep seeing these little assaults, you have to wonder at what point are you a democracy anymore versus an authoritarian, well, not quite a dictatorship, but again, you watch films, and this is why we're doing this podcast, is that we're examining these movies, and then we're seeing examples that are scary in their truth about what we're seeing happening in the real world today. And that's where, this movie, The Mortal Storm, is 85 years old.
Yeah. And it really shows us sort of the personal cost of living in this type of government or regime, and how that really just eats away at us and eats away at our relationships with each other, and that human element is really a part of anti-fascist aesthetics in general, which is that fascist aesthetics can be orderly and cold and somewhat sentimental, actually, and melodramatic. And the sentiment often comes towards the end of Nazi films is they tend to believe in a glorious death.
In terms of Victor, and this is what I think is so powerful in this 6 months and throughout even my own history and the questions that come up of how did this happen? And
right.
How do people not know? Because that seems to be always the big party line. Oh, the German people didn't know about the concentration camps. And, people in America didn't know.
We didn't know how bad it was.
But also they didn't know there was a concentration camp. And this film from 1940 disproves a lot of what the modern thought about those times, because in short order, and partly at this time, it wasn't necessarily because Victor Roth is obviously a Jewish person.
No, it's because of his intellectual pursuits.
Right. He is rounded up for questioning and detained. And this is something that Hitler did in the first 6 months to the first couple of years as they started to formalize their plans. They rounded up somehow 200,000 people that they, for various political reasons, intellectuals, and probably gave preference to people who were Jewish. And this film in 1940, when supposedly America didn't know what was happening, it actually shows one of the first instances of a concentration camp.
Yeah, Professor Roth is put in a concentration camp. We see a few shots of it. His wife goes to visit him there, and he is really defiant. He says, if they let me out of here, I'll just keep pursuing science. And so he doesn't think he'll be let out, and he isn't. Ultimately ends up dying in the concentration camp. And it's not a death camp. I don't think that that was really known to that extent, or at least not being put in a Hollywood film. But he does die in the concentration camp. And that's this family is sort of slowly winnowed away throughout the film. They keep losing people, and they lose him, and then it's just Freya and her mother and her younger brother.
Well, mind you, the brothers were they turned against him as well.
Oh yes, yeah, that's what I mean. The stepsons, they peel off and become Nazis and move out of the house, and so the house becomes more. It starts with a whole bunch of friends over there for the birthday party, and late in the film, Freya is the only person left in the house. She's all alone. The rest of the family has been destroyed, and at that point is when she needs to escape.
They show this empty house, and they show the dining room where at the beginning of the film was this warm, wonderful birthday celebration. And now this whole family has been completely destroyed. Again, I don't think in terms of if we look at 6 months ago to now, that's, not the case. But for some people it is. Some people, they may have enjoyed their last bit of normalcy and happiness prior to an election that we had in the United States. And then now for some people in this country, their whole world has been upheaved and damaged. I mean, think about people who had jobs that they thought were secure, but because they had a government job, they may not have it. And all the lives destroyed, and it's stuff that it should weigh on all of our minds, and it should elicit shame at the very least.
A film like this asks us to empathize with these people who are going through this, but it's made clear in the film that the Nazis see empathy as a weakness. And, at one point, Fritz says Fritz doesn't want to go out and hunt down Freya. And he says, I beg you, just understand a moment of human weakness. And the Nazis are like, absolutely not. In our regime, there's no room for humanity, which I think might actually be a line.
We don't want to give away every aspect of this movie, all the plot things, but essentially Freya and realizes that she really loves Jimmy Stewart. Of course, he's Jimmy Stewart playing a bad guy. That just don't happen. Okay,
right?
You don't want it to happen. You want him to be the hero. As a matter of fact, that was one of the first things that you were very worried about when you first saw this movie. You told me is that you were worried for a minute that you thought that they were making Jimmy Stewart was going to be a Nazi, and that just did not gel with your thought process on Jimmy Stewart.
No, that would just not work. I wouldn't be able to buy that at all. But Jimmy Stewart as the apolitical farmer who just wants peace and a simple life, I think that stands in for a lot of people who don't really want to be involved in this and just kind of want to go about their life, but they can't because this is insinuating itself into every aspect of their life. And he ends up helping somebody escape. So Mr. Werner, his former teacher, escape across the Alps on skis. And then Jimmy Stewart, the Martin character, comes back to Germany to rescue Freya. And this is when their love story really starts. When they say "I love you" to each other, and Martin's mother is there, and we have this very touching scene. And then they go to escape, and the Nazis are hot on their trail, led by Fritz.
You had mentioned something a little bit earlier that Victor and his scientific papers. So there's an opportunity for Freya and her family to get out of Germany. And
Yeah.
she's carrying those papers, and it's those papers that are sort of the undoing, because through a routine inspection on the train,
Yeah.
they are discovered, and they're like, "What is this? This is science. We can't have this."
Exactly. And she, instead of giving up the manuscript and continuing on, she says, this has such sentimental value to me. It's a handwritten manuscript. She's not trying to publish it or secret away information. It just has sentimental value to her. And so there's a thing here where if she realized how bad it is, she might have given up the manuscript. But there's this sort of denial that goes on even at this late stage when they're escaping the country, of this idea of, well, it can't really be that bad, can it?
You don't have history to understand what's going to happen, so you still think.
Yeah, you still think, well, it can't be that. It's just a manuscript. It's just sentimental value. Surely you'll understand that and let me go. And they don't.
Now the mother and the son get to go.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And she's held back for detention, but I can't remember, does Fritz get involved in making sure that she's released?
No, they just take away her passport and say you can't leave. And she just goes back to the house all alone. And then she gets the letter from Martin's mother saying, come on up. She goes up to the house, Martin's there, and then they plan their escape. And they have to climb up over the Alps. There's a big kind of set piece ski chase at the end with the Nazis chasing after them on skis. The big shock in this movie, I watched it with my teenage daughter, and she was really surprised by the ending because Freya dies.
Does Fritz, as the one who accidentally shoots her?
Fritz orders the shot, but several different people shoot, so we don't know exactly which one of them hits her.
And he's really trying to kill Martin. I think he doesn't want Freya to get hit.
He doesn't want to kill. He doesn't want to kill Freya. He doesn't even want to order the shot. You see it on his face, but he feels this sense of duty to the Nazis, to the nation, and that is what's motivating him more so than his own feelings of humanity. And these are his best friends for his whole life, and he's shooting at them, and it is kind of tearing him up inside. So Freya has this death that is very quiet. She's bleeding out, and she has a few lines of dialogue with Jimmy Stewart before she dies.
And mind you, they had gotten over the border, right? They had gotten to safety, but unfortunately,
And so she has this very quiet kind of emotional death. It's sad, it's mournful. And in a way, what it does is it morally implicates the audience. Her death is a moral testament, right? That this violence has happened, and now we have this tragedy. And often and that's an essential part of anti-fascist aesthetics, is that we end with tragedy, and the audience is responsible for creating the new world that comes after. As opposed to having a hero, that would have been the hero ending, is they get away and they leave the Nazis behind.
Or you expect that Jimmy Stewart's the one who gets killed.
Or you expect, yes, exactly, because that, again, would be a sacrificial death. He would die to save her. And that kind of sacrifice we see much more in fascist films, where the hero dies this glorious death. Death is glorious. It's a sacrifice for the good of the nation. They become martyrs. And Freya's not a martyr, and it's not glorious. It's just sad. And so it doesn't give us a heroic death, or a death that glorifies in any way. It doesn't glorify even our anti-fascism, right? Which his death might do a little bit, which would be a heroic death. So just this sadness and this tragedy and the moral weight of it. And then Fritz has to go back to her brothers and tell them that he's killed Freya. And he says, it was my duty. I had no choice. You can tell that kind of eats him up inside, but he's still going along with it. And it just shows how people, despite their own personal moral stances or ideas about resistance, get caught up in this and follow orders and go right along with it. And then the film ends with the two brothers having this discussion about whether they want to live in a place where you can think freely or not. And it sort of ends on that question, and ends on, what do we do with her death? How do we reconcile that? It's totally unjust. It's ordered by the state, and it's a tragedy.
Well, at least one of the brothers, doesn't he rip off his Nazi armband?
No, he just says he won't be thinking like us, and the other brother slaps him.
Right. So even with all of this tragedy, the spell of fascism is so corrupting that
Yes.
only one is able to like have the fog lifted.
Yeah, and even just a little bit, he just has this thought of, "Oh, maybe people will be able to think as they please," and it's like what Mr. Werner says in the beer hall is a person should be able to sing or not as they please, and it's that simple, and Martin's whole thing is, we should be able to think as we please. And it's that simple level of personal freedom that's been robbed, not just by sort of their draconian intimidation, and there's plenty of that with Nazis interrogating people and stuff in this movie, but there's also just the very simple peer pressure that happens in these in groups, and they get together and they, hey, we're the in group, you're the out group, and we we will beat you up as they do.
It becomes this sports team mentality where
Yes.
people lose sight of what they may be giving up to join, say, a group, but they're so into their brand, their team, and winning as sort of that slogan's become so popular. Winning is more important, and you start to forget what you've won and what
Yes.
you're going to lose. But people, in general, like as social creatures, people like to be part of a winning team, right? So whichever side seems to be winning, they want to be part of that side.
Well, and it's this idea that the future. This goes back to sort of that Paxton idea that that fascism is action, and that the victory itself matters more than what the victory was about, right? And so you're just cheering wins. It doesn't really matter what the win is, as long as your team is on the win.
Right. Massive executive orders every other day where somebody has lost their job, this or that.
Yeah.
Well, that can elicit a sense of winning to somebody because what is that term? Owning the libs. And I say,
Yep. Exactly.
owning the libs at your own peril because
And that's what ultimately what happens in this movie with killing Freya, right? Is you end up killing the person that you love and we're engaged to, and sort of that those intimate betrayals and peer pressure and the silence, as opposed to just a bunch of goose stepping Gestapo being violent. This really shows us the sort of the political clarity of these on the emotional level of what people are going through. And that's a very so it gives us an emotional education about the impact of fascism while also giving us a bunch of facts about what fascism is and how it presents itself.
it really drills down to the personal cost of what it can do
Yes.
to an individual, to a family, and it does it again in a sensational way. I definitely think as we go through this journey of watching these films, talking about these films, there are, and I think that's what we're doing in kind of this first series of looks at fascism, is we're trying to cover some big films that are
Yeah.
very important to give you that base knowledge and to start seeing things come up over again. Plus, it's fascinating to look at the rise of Nazi Germany before we actually get into, tanks and guns and
Yeah.
battles. This is kind of what was happening. Everybody, I think, goes, oh, Nazi Germany in the 40s or World War
Right.
II. But no, this was happening from the late 20s through up to 1940. There's a whole period here. And this film is an essential one that people should look at. There's something that I think if you're going to look at this for the first time, watch for these little subtle
Yeah.
things. The book dealt with a lot more of the politics that surrounded the
Right.
ideology of Nazism versus communism and
Right.
socialism. And basically, Martin's character, the veterinarian, he is represented as the more of the
Socialist.
the socialist, the communist, and they, of course, with the Hayes Code and all these other restrictions, they had to, just the way that America was fairly anti-Semitic, they were also very anti-communist, and so they dialed that way back. But there are some little hints that you could pick up.
Oh, there definitely are. The more I watch this film, the more I see just, little tiny 3-word lines that pack a punch.
Well, I think that was the genius of script writing in that period, the golden era of Hollywood, is that once the code went up, filmmakers had to get very clever.
Yes, absolutely.
That adds a little bit of complexity and dimension.
So I would say that if you're, wanting to get into this fascism on film kind of bandwagon, this is definitely the film to start with. If you want a little education about what fascism is and the effect it has on people's families and their lives, I think this is a great place to start. It is like a primer on fascism and what it means, and it affects us powerfully, I think.
I think you're going to see a lot of things in this film that you will be able to relate to
Yes.
much differently than you might have in other times that this film's been out. And I think that's what makes this film is starting to get rediscovered. I was surprised that there's a theater in Massachusetts that does a lot of revival houses. They're doing an entire series on hating the Nazis.
Oh,
And this movie shows up as one of the films in that
yeah.
series. And I don't think I had ever seen this film show up in a revival setting.
Yeah.
So what's happening is this movie's getting rediscovered. So I think we both are encouraging people to take a look at this film. I don't know if every movie that we're going to cover will want to encourage. But
there's somewhere I feel like it's more of a deep cut, but this I feel like would be in the top 5 of the greatest hits.
It's definitely it's a must see.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we have coming up on our next episode, Teal?
Next episode, we'll be talking about 1981's film Mephisto, about an actor who gets caught up in the Nazi theatrical and movie production regime.
And that's a film that was the winner of the Academy Award that year.
Yes, for Best Foreign Language Film, yes.
Again, it took me many years to see it, and I only saw it a few years ago. And it does feature an amazing central performance by Klaus Rieb.
Unbelievable, yeah.
So look forward to that on the next episode of Fascism.
Okay, thanks for listening.
Yep, and again, you can find our episodes on Apple Podcasts, other places where you find podcasts, and also you can go to our website, and the URL is Teal?
www.fascismonfilm.com.
Such a clever ring to it. All right, everybody. Till next time.